Picture a land so fertile that you can push a stick into the ground and it will practically bloom on its own. A place where the soil is so dark and so deep and so impossibly rich that men built entire fortunes off it. Empires, really. Great white houses with columns like Greek temples, surrounded by live oaks dripping Spanish moss, overlooking fields that stretched so far in every direction that you couldn't see where they ended. Now fill that picture with hunger, real hunger, not I skipped lunch. Hunger, not I should probably eat something hunger. The kind of hunger that lives in your bones, the kind that makes your vision swim at the edges when you stand up too fast. The kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with your stomach cramping so hard you curl up around yourself like a shrimp, biting down on nothing, swallowing nothing, trying to convince your body that you fed it today. You did feed it. Sort of. Cornmeal, salt pork with more fat than meat. A handful of molasses on Sundays if the weather had been good and the master was feeling generous. That's the fuel they gave you to work from first light to last light 6 days a week, in the heat of a Mississippi summer that sits on your chest like a living thing and doesn't lift until October. Add to that the smell of cotton, that particular dry, slightly sweet, slightly dusty smell that gets into everything. Your clothes, your hair, your skin, the inside of your lungs. Add the sound of bowls opening in August heat, a sound like nothing else, a soft crackle that runs through entire fields like a whisper passing from plant to plant. Add the feeling of your fingers on those bowls, the sharp edges that aren't obvious until they've sliced you 40 times in a day, and your hands look like you've been gripping broken glass. Add the weight of a cotton sack, full, dragging behind you across hard-packed red earth. And add one more thing. Add what happens when none of that food is enough. When your body starts screaming for something it isn't getting. When hunger is so deep and so constant that it stops being a feeling and starts being your whole life. Add what some people found to fill that emptiness. White clay, smooth, cool, white clay, scooped out the ground with fingers that already bled. That's where we're going tonight. Not to the plantations as tourists, not to see the columns and the magnolias. We're going down into the fields. We're going into the slave quarters at 3 a.m. when the hunger wakes you up and you lie in the dark trying not to think about tomorrow. We're going to the place in the creek bank where the white clay comes through, where it's been smoothed by water into something that almost looks clean. We're going to understand what it meant to be that hungry and what people did about it. So, get comfortable. This is Henry's History for Sleep, and I make these history stories, and honestly, whether you're listening for education or you just fell asleep to me once and now apparently this is your thing, either way, I'm glad you're here. Subscribe if you want. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. The darkness in a slave cabin in Mississippi in 1847 is something specific. It's not the comfortable darkness of a room with curtains drawn, the kind where if you wait long enough, your eyes adjust and you can make out shapes. This is the darkness of a place with one tiny window covered by a piece of burlap sacking. No candle, no fireplace in summer, because there's no point and no wood to spare, and walls made of rough-hewn boards with gaps between them that let in cold in winter and insects in summer, but not much light either way. For a moment, maybe half a second, you've forgotten where you are. Then it comes back. Then the smell hits you. It's not one smell. It never is one smell in here. It's layers, and your brain has learned to read those layers the way a sailor reads weather. First, bodies. A dozen people in a space meant for livestock. The warm, close, slightly sour smell of sleeping human beings who worked themselves half to death yesterday and will do it again tomorrow. Sweat that dried on skin and sweat that didn't. The smell isn't dirty exactly. Everyone here takes what care they can. Creek water and pine soap on Saturdays. But there's a baseline that never fully washes out when you live like this, when you sleep like this. Second, cornmeal, the ghost of it, from the pot that sat on the fire last night, that particular chalky, slightly grainy smell that means supper, means not enough supper. Third, something metallic, blood, maybe, from someone's hands. The cotton has been opening for 3 weeks now, and everybody's hands are cut, and the cuts don't get to heal because you use those hands again the next morning. The metallic smell lives in the space between the boards and the straw and the bodies. Fourth, the earth itself, Mississippi dirt. Not the dark topsoil of the fields, but the deeper smell, the one that comes up through the packed floor of the cabin, the clay-heavy subsoil of this particular bend in the river, that heavy, ancient, slightly sweet smell that isn't like anywhere else in the world. That fourth smell. That's the one that matters tonight. Welcome to a cotton plantation in the Mississippi Delta. The year is 1847, and outside these thin boards, the fields are waiting. Your name is Ida. You're 16 years old, though nobody wrote it down anywhere, so what you know is that you were born in the summer. You know this because the woman who raised you told you so, told you that you arrived during the worst heat anyone could remember, that it was July and the world was like a furnace and you came into it screaming, and that you have been on this plantation your entire life, except for 2 years ago when they took your mother. Sold south, which is a direction, and also a word that means something worse, means further from anything you know, means you will likely never see her again. You don't think about that in the mornings. There's no room to think about that in the mornings. You think about your hands. The cuts from yesterday's cotton are tight and stiff in the cool pre-dawn air. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling the scabbing pull at the skin. There's one cut on your right index finger that's deeper than the rest. You caught it on a dry bowl in the late afternoon when you were tired and not paying attention, and it bled into the sack for 20 minutes before it slowed down. It's the kind of cut that would need a day of rest to heal properly. You won't get a day of rest. Around you the cabin is stirring. The woman across from you, Celia, maybe 50, nobody knows exactly. Her joints swell up in cold weather, and she moves like every step is a negotiation. Celia is already sitting up, wrapping her feet in strips of cloth before she puts on her shoes. The strips are to protect the places where the leather has worn through. She does this every morning with the same careful, automatic movements, like she's done it 1,000 times. She has done it 1,000 times. Next to her, 2 children are still asleep. A boy named Thomas, 8 years old, and a girl whose name you don't know yet because she arrived 3 months ago from a plantation further north, and she hasn't told anyone her name. She answers to what they call her, which is just girl, and she sleeps with her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself like she's trying to take up as little space as possible. You understand that impulse. You pull on your dress. One dress. It's what you have for summer. It's been washed so many times, it's lost whatever colour it started as, and is now just a kind of pale grey-brown, the colour of exhaustion. The fabric is rough on your shoulders. it's always rough on your shoulders. Outside, the field hands are already gathering at the edge of the yard. The bell rang 3 minutes ago. You move. Here's what they fed you. This is a thing that historians have gone back and quantified, because planters kept records. Planters kept meticulous records of everything, because everything on a plantation was an asset, including the people. And so we know, with some precision, what the weekly food allotment looked like for an enslaved adult in the Mississippi Delta in the 1840s. 3.5 pounds of salt pork. That's about the size of a small paperback novel. That's your meat for the week. A peck of cornmeal. A peck is 8 quarts. Sounds like a lot until you do the math across 7 days of hard physical labour. Sometimes molasses, sometimes sweet potatoes in season. Sometimes, on the larger and more generous plantations, a small vegetable garden that you are permitted to tend on Sundays, your 1 day off. That's it. No fresh vegetables for most of the year. No fruit unless you could steal it from the orchards. No milk, no eggs, no variety of any kind. Just cornmeal and salt. Pork, day after day after day. What does a body do with that? Your body, working the fields 12 to 14 hours a day in Mississippi summer heat, burns somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 calories. That food allotment gives you maybe 1,500 on a good day, maybe less if the pork is mostly fat and the cornmeal is old. You are always a little bit starving, not enough to collapse, not enough to die from usually, enough to keep working, just barely enough to keep working. But here's what that constant deficit does, over weeks and months and years. Here's what it does that you can feel. It hollows you out, not just in your stomach, in your bones. You need iron for blood, for energy, for thinking clearly. The cornmeal has some, the salt pork has some, but not enough. Not nearly enough for a 16-year-old girl who works harder in a day than most people work in a week. You need calcium. Your bones are still forming at 16. Your teeth need it. Your muscles need it. You need zinc. You need magnesium. You need a dozen trace minerals that your body can't produce and that the food you're given doesn't contain. Your body knows this. Your body knows things that you don't have words for yet. It registers absences the way a tongue registers the space where a tooth used to be. Constantly, insistently, sending up signals in the form of cravings that make no rational sense, or at least no sense until you understand what the cravings are looking for. And in 1847, on this plantation, in this bend of the Mississippi River, there is something in the ground that the body wants. White clay. You find out about the clay the way you find out about most things that matter, not from anyone who sits you down and explains it. From a sideways conversation, half heard, from watching, from being 17 and curious and hungry, and finally, one afternoon, desperate enough to try. The woman who tells you is named Ruth. Ruth is not old, but looks old. She's maybe 35, which is not old anywhere else, but is older than most people get to be in the fields without something breaking. She has a way of moving that conserves every motion. No wasted steps, no extra gestures. Like she has done a precise calculation of how much she can spend, and intends to not spend a drop more. She has a mouth that sometimes, in the evenings, tells stories that go back further than anyone alive can remember. Stories from people who are dead now. Stories from their parents and their parents' parents, carried across an ocean that nobody here has seen, and none of them were meant to survive. You are walking back from the fields on a Thursday afternoon in September. The harvest is still 3 weeks from ending. The sacks are heavy. Your fingers ache in ways that have stopped being interesting. It's just background noise now. The ache, the way city people stop hearing traffic. Ruth is ahead of you on the path. She stops, not for rest. Ruth doesn't stop for rest unless she's about to fall down. She stops near the edge of a small gully where a stream cuts through the red clay of the embankment. The gully is maybe 10 feet deep here, its walls streaked red and orange, and in one long pale stripe near the bottom, white and smooth. Like someone took a blade and drew a line of pale chalk through the red earth. Ruth looks at it for a moment. Then she looks around. Quick, practiced, measuring. The overseer is 200 yards back, moving away. Ruth slides down the edge of the gully in a movement so smooth and practiced it's almost graceful. In the time it takes you to realize what she's doing, she's already at the bottom, already crouching at the pale stripe, already pressing her fingers into it. The white clay comes away in a smooth chunk, about the size of a large marble. She puts it in her mouth. You stare. She looks up at you. Her expression is completely calm. You coming down here, or are you going to stand up there looking like you've seen something strange? You slide down the embankment. Up close, the white clay is striking. It's a different colour than anything else in this landscape. Not the red Georgia clay, not the brown Mississippi topsoil, not the black muck of the river bottom. This is white, chalky white, slightly grey in the shadows, smooth where the water has touched it. It looks almost clean. You take a piece. It's cool against your fingers, surprisingly heavy for its size. You look at it. What does it? Just put it in your mouth. You put it in your mouth. The first thing is the texture. Smooth, impossibly smooth. Your tongue, which has been working on rough cornbread and salt pork since the first day it knew what food was, moves over this thing and almost doesn't know what to do with it. It's cool on contact, slightly slippery in the way that nothing else is slippery. Then the taste, or rather, almost no taste at first, then something mineral, something that's not quite sweet and not quite salt, something that's deep and earthy but also somehow clean. The taste of the ground itself, which should be disgusting and isn't, should be disgusting, isn't. Your mouth floods with saliva the way it does before you eat a meal. Your stomach, which has been making its low, insistent complaints since noon, goes quiet. Not because it's full, it isn't. But something in the clay has touched some nerve, satisfied some craving so specific that it doesn't have a name in any language you know. You stand in the bottom of the gully, listening to the overseer moving away somewhere above and behind you, chewing on white clay, and feel something that is not quite hunger and not quite relief, but something that lives in the space between them. Ruth watches you. My grandmother ate this, she says, in Africa before. Where we come from, people have eaten earth like this since before anyone can remember. It's not strange. It's only strange here. She presses another piece away from the pale seam. Clean break. She's done this before, many times. It helps? She looks at you directly for a moment. Ruth does not look directly at most people most of the time. It's a survival habit. You learn to look at the ground or the middle distance when white people are watching, and the habit bleeds over into everything. But she looks at you now, full in the face, and says, "It helps." Here is what was actually happening in that gully. Here is the science which the people who ate the clay didn't have words for in 1847, but which their bodies understood perfectly. The white clay that runs through the soil of the Mississippi Delta, the Georgia Piedmont, the red hills of Alabama, This is kaolin, the same stuff that goes into fine china, the same stuff they use in cosmetics, in pharmaceuticals, in paper coating. Kaolin, from the Chinese word for high hill, because the most famous deposits were in China, but it exists in vast quantities throughout the American South. Kaolin has properties. It's absorbent. It can bind toxins in the gut, tannins, certain plant-based poisons, which is useful if your diet consists of things that, in the wrong quantities or wrong preparation, might make you sick. It's rich in calcium. Not in a form your body can use perfectly, but something. It's rich in iron. Bound iron, which is harder to absorb than a food source iron, but which the body, in conditions of extreme deficiency, can sometimes manage to pull something from. And it does something in the stomach that is harder to quantify, but that anyone who has ever taken a kaolin-based antacid, which, by the way, Copectate, the children's upset stomach medicine, is literally named for kaolin, will recognize. It coats, it soothes, it puts something soft between the stomach wall and the acid and the nothing that's in there. The hunger doesn't go away, but it gets quiet for a while. Bodies are not stupid. These bodies in particular had been selecting for this knowledge for generations. The women, it was mostly women, though not only, who recognized this property in the clay, who ate it and felt better and ate it again and told their daughters and their sisters. Those women's children survived slightly better than the ones who didn't know. The knowledge was adaptive. It persisted. It persisted across an ocean. In West Africa, in the regions of what is now Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, eating certain kinds of earth is not a secret shameful habit. It is medicine. It is a recognized practice with names in a dozen languages. Pregnant women eat it. Sick people eat it. Children are given it in small amounts. The specific earth, white or pale grey, usually from certain riverbeds and hillsides, is traded. It is considered a resource. People knew this. They were brought here knowing this. And when they got here, they looked at the soil of this new land, this alien landscape with its different trees and different sky and different everything. They looked at this and found the pale seams and the creek banks and the places where the right clay came through, and they thought, we know what to do with this. The knowledge travelled with them when everything else was taken, when the language was beaten out of them, when the names were replaced with American names, when the religion, the music, the family structures were all disrupted and destroyed and reconstructed into something unrecognizable. The clay knowledge survived, because you can't take knowledge that lives in a body, because when your body says in its wordless, precise way, this thing, yes, this, nobody can stop you knowing that. The fields in September smell different than the fields in July. In July, there's the heavy green smell of growing things, the smell of water in tall grass, the smell of a living world that is not concerned with you or your pain. There's a certain comfort in that, actually. The world growing anyway. In September, the cotton is open and the smell changes. Dry now. All that moisture pulled out of the bowls and into the air. The smell of dust and dry fibre and the particular sweetness of cotton lint that gets into your nose and doesn't fully leave until winter. Your lungs have adjusted to it. Sort of. Some of the older hands cough all through harvest. A deep, caught-up cough that rattles round in the chest. A few of them have had it so long it doesn't seem like a specific symptom anymore. It seems like part of who they are. You drag the sack between the rows. Your fingers find the open bowls by feel now. You stopped looking at them weeks ago. The motion is automatic. Reach in, Pull out the lint. Avoid the sharp point of the dried calyx. Don't stop moving. Never stop moving. Because stopping moving means the overseer notices, and the overseer noticing means things that are worse than the cuts on your fingers. His name is Cole. He's 26 years old, not particularly large, with a red face that gets redder in the heat. He carries a whip that he uses more than some and less than others, and the threat of it is almost worse than the thing itself because the anticipation is constant and the thing itself, at least, is over. He knows about the clay. Of course he knows. You learn this a week after Ruth shows you the gully. You learn it when you see what happens to a woman named Martha. Martha is caught with clay in her pocket, not eating it, not even eating it in the moment, just carrying it. A smooth white lump about the size of a walnut wrapped in a piece of cloth, tucked into the pocket of her dress. One of the other women tells on her. You won't ever know who exactly. This is one of the small brutalities of the system. The way it creates informers, the way people are put into positions where someone else's pain might buy a small reduction of their own. It poisons everything, every friendship, every community. You can't fully trust anyone because you don't know what they've been promised or what they've been threatened with. Cole finds the clay. He turns it over in his hands. His expression is not angry, exactly. More contemptuous. The expression of a man who has encountered an old problem and is tired of it. Where'd you get this? Martha says nothing. He knows where she got it. Everyone knows there are at least 2 places on the plantation where the white kaolin comes through. He has tried to fill them in, cover them over, redirect the little streams that expose them. The clay keeps coming back. The earth at least does not accommodate him. What happens next is the iron muzzle. You've seen it before, hanging on a nail in the barn. A contraption of iron straps and a flat piece of metal that covers the mouth, held on by straps that go over the head and under the chin and lock in the back. It allows breathing. It does not allow eating. She wears it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of harvest, working in the fields with an iron device over her mouth, breathing through her nose in the September heat, unable to eat except when Cole or someone he designates unlocks it at mealtime, twice a day, and watches her eat and then locks it back on. 2 weeks. You watch this happen. You watch Martha working the rows next to you with that thing on her face, and you learn several things simultaneously. You learn that the hunger is considered, by the people who own this place, to be less important than their authority over what goes into your body. Your hunger is theirs to manage. What you eat, when you eat, whether you eat, these are decisions that belong to them. Eating clay without permission is a violation of that ownership, not of your health, of their property rights. You learn that the word they use for what Ruth and Martha and a dozen others do is a disease. Cole says it like that, says he won't have this disease on his place, this African habit, this sickness. There are doctors, you'll learn later, who have written it up in medical journals as a specific pathology. Cachexia africana, they call it. A disease of black people, a sign of mental deficiency, a habit that needs to be cured, suppressed, contained, not a response to starvation, not a physiological adaptation to a diet that cannot sustain a working body. A disease. You learn that the iron muzzle is one response. There are others. The doctors recommend purges, which is to say they recommend giving already underfed people medicines that make them sick, which is called treatment. You learn that Martha eats the clay again as soon as the muzzle comes off. You're standing next to her at the creek one morning, 3 days after Cole removes the iron contraption and locks it back in the barn, and you watch her crouch down and press her fingers into the pale seam of kaolin with the same precise, practiced motion as always. She looks up and catches you watching. "What?" she says. "Nothing, you think. Just learning." The system of rations runs like this. Sunday morning, the overseer distributes the week's allotment. He does this in front of the barn, and the enslaved people line up and receive their portions in whatever containers they have. Old crockery, tin cups, folded cloth. The amounts are fixed, no more, no less. There are no seconds. If the food runs out before the week does, if the pork was salty and you ate more of it earlier to get rid of the thirst it caused, or if you had visitors, or if a child ate more than his portion because children don't understand rations, then the last day or 2 days before Sunday you have nothing, or you have what you can find. People grow things in small plots when they're permitted. Sweet potatoes, greens, a few rows of sorghum. On larger plantations with more lenient masters, lenient, which is a word that means less restrictive than the worst, not actually kind. There might be chickens, a fishing line run to the river, the possibility of supplementing the rations with something. Here, fishing's allowed on Sunday afternoons. You have one hook and no rod, just a line tied to a stick. You've pulled enough catfish from the river to know that certain spots are better than others, that early morning is better than afternoon, that the fish don't care what your week has been like. Catfish don't feel sorry for you. That's almost comforting. You bring whatever you catch back to the cabin. Ruth has a way with the fire, has learned over decades how to make something from almost nothing. She can take 3 small catfish and a handful of cornmeal and produce something hot that, if you eat it slowly enough, feels like a meal. But in harvest, there's no time for Sunday fishing. There's barely time for Sunday anything. The cotton doesn't wait. And so in late September, in the last push before the harvest is done, the rations feel like what they are. Not fuel, not food, a calculation. Just enough to keep you upright and moving. Barely enough. The minimum investment required to protect the property. Your body does the arithmetic on its own. The clay helps in a way that is hard to explain to someone who hasn't been that hungry. It's not filling. It doesn't feel like eating a meal. Your stomach knows the difference between clay and food with a precision that is almost insulting. It knows, it keeps you informed. What it does is quiet something. There is a specific hunger, underneath the general hunger, deeper than the stomach, coming from somewhere in the blood and the bones, that the clay touches, a craving that sits below language, below conscious experience, in the part of you that just knows what it needs. That craving, when you eat the clay, subsides. Not completely, but enough. Enough to let you breathe. Enough to let the rest of the hunger feel survivable. Ruth explains it in terms that make sense to the body, which is the only kind of explanation that matters in a place like this. The earth has things in it, she says. Not medicine, not science, not vitamins. She doesn't have those. Words. But the meaning is the same. The earth has what you're missing. Your body knows what it's missing. This is not strange. This is your body doing its job. She tells you this on a Wednesday evening after the work is done, sitting outside the cabin in the cooling air. The sky above the delta going from orange to purple, to the deep blue-black of a country night with no artificial lights anywhere for 50 miles. The stars here are extraordinary. You've always known this, in the way that you always know things that have been true your entire life, with a kind of background appreciation that doesn't quite rise to active acknowledgement most of the time. But on evenings like this, when the body is tired enough that the mind loosens its grip on survival and lets something else in, you look up and it hits you. All of that. All of that light that has been travelling for thousands of years. And here, this. Ruth talks about where she came from. Not in detail. The details are gone, or they're too painful, or they belong to her alone. But in the way you tell children about a world they can't access. Your people, she says, meaning not just her people, but yours too, though you've never been there. Your people understood the earth, understood what it offered and what it required, understood the difference between taking and receiving. Here they take everything, but the earth, she says, the earth still offers. You look at your hands, the cuts, the staining of cotton lint that doesn't fully wash out, the roughness at the fingertips that wasn't there 2 years ago. The earth still offers. Nighttime in the quarters is its own country. During the day, the space belongs to the work, to the white men who own it, to the rhythms they impose. At night, after the bell, after the last accounting, after Cole does his round and goes back to his own house, the space shifts. It doesn't become free exactly, but it becomes yours, partly, in the ways that are possible. The conversations that can't happen in daylight happen now, not loudly. Everything here happens at a volume calibrated to the walls, to the distance to the big house, to the possibility that someone is listening. A lifetime of this produces a kind of spoken whisper that isn't quite whispering. You can hear it clearly up close, but it doesn't carry. The child who won't give her name, you've been watching her. She arrived 3 months ago, and in those 3 months she has spoken maybe 40 words total that you've heard. She eats what she's given. She does what she's told. She works as hard as anyone. But at night sometimes, you wake up and hear her crying. Not loudly. That same calibrated quietness. Just enough to release something. The sound of a person maintaining themselves against forces that want to reduce them to nothing. You don't say anything. You lie there in the dark and listen and don't say anything, because sometimes what you need is not to be seen or helped or talked to. Sometimes what you need is to be allowed to cry. You understand this. One night, about 6 weeks after you start eating the clay yourself, you wake up at the usual 3 a.m. and find the child sitting up in her corner. She isn't crying. She's holding something in her hands. You can't see it in the dark, but from the smell, that particular mineral earth smell, you know, Ruth. Ruth must have shown her. You lie there and don't say anything and listen to the faint sound of her eating clay in the dark cabin in the middle of Mississippi, in the middle of the 19th century, and you think about all the women before her who did the same thing. In this country, in the country across the ocean, in the long chain of women going back further than you can imagine who found this particular comfort and passed it down. Some things can't be taken from you, not because you're allowed to keep them, but because no one can get to them. The body keeps its own knowledge. Let's talk about the geography for a moment, because it matters which clay you're eating. It matters quite a lot. The southeastern United States sits on some of the most kaolin-rich soil in the world. There's a band of it that runs roughly from central Georgia down through Alabama into Mississippi and Louisiana, called, by geologists, by the people who mine it for industrial purposes, the kaolin belt. In places the deposits are hundreds of feet thick, ancient seabeds compressed and transformed over millions of years into this specific white mineral. The kaolin from different places tastes different. This is something you learn over time from Ruth, from Celia, from the older women who've been here long enough to have tried every pale seam within walking distance. The clay from the creek bank to the south tastes cleaner, more mineral, less earth, with a faint chalky quality that lingers pleasantly. The clay from the swampy low ground to the east is greyer and slightly bitter, and nobody really prefers it, but it will do. The best clay, the one people try to get to if they can manage it, is further than that. 2 miles north, at a bend in the main creek where the water cuts deep into a hillside, there's a place where the kaolin comes out almost white as paper, smooth, cold to the touch even in summer because that side of the hill faces north and the water cools it. It breaks in smooth, clean chunks. That clay, eaten in small amounts, is the one that quiets the deepest hunger, the one that touches the mineral deficiency rather than just the stomach acid. You get there twice. Both times on Sunday afternoons, in early fall when the harvest gives way to slightly less constant supervision, when Cole disappears for a few hours and his absence is a gift, which is how you understand all of your gaps of freedom, as gifts, as weather, as something to be used quickly before it changes. The walk there is 2 miles through fields and along creek bottoms, past stands of tupelo and cypress, through air that smells of mud and green water and the specific autumn smell of the south, which is hay, and something burning somewhere distant and the first cool undertone of approaching fall. On the way back from the second trip with a piece of the good clay wrapped in your headcloth, you stop at the top of a low ridge and look out, and see, for the first time from above, the shape of the place where you live. From the ridge, it's maybe 40 feet above the flat of the delta, which counts as a hill in this part of Mississippi. The plantation spreads out below you in a way you've never seen it from the ground. The fields. God, the fields. They go on forever. You've worked in them your whole life and you've never understood the scale until this moment, standing up here with the late afternoon light coming in flat from the west, and the whole thing spread out below you like a quilt. The cotton bolls open and white, row after row after row, running to the horizon. Miles of it, the work of hundreds of people for decades, converting wild delta land into this machine. The big house is visible from here, white, columned, perfectly proportioned, sitting in its frame of live oaks and magnolias like it has always been there, like it grew from the ground, like it is a natural thing. It is not a natural thing. It is the product of the same labour that produced those fields. The same hands that cut themselves on cotton bolls made the bricks of that house. The same bodies that drag those sacks along those rows cook the food that gets served in those rooms, iron the linens that go on those beds, build and clean and maintain and sustain every piece of that beautiful, terrible structure. And the slave quarters are visible too from here. Small, set back from the big house, screened by trees. The trees were planted specifically to screen them, you realise suddenly, standing on this ridge. Not for the benefit of the people living there, but so that the view from the big house wouldn't be spoiled, so that the machinery could be nearby without being visible. You can see both things at once from here, the columns and the low cabins, the magnolias and the clay pits, the white house and the white clay. You stand there for a minute, let yourself see it. Ruth's voice in your head. The earth still offers. The earth you're standing on is the same earth as that clay seam. The same earth that grows that cotton. The same earth that the big house is built on. You didn't choose this earth, but you know it. You know it in ways that the people in that White House don't know it and never will. You know its smell in different seasons, its hardness in drought, its give after rain. You know where the good clay is and where the bad clay is, and what different colours of soil mean for what grows in them. This earth is not yours. They have made that very clear. But your knowledge of it is yours. You turn and walk back down the ridge toward the quarters before anyone notices you're gone. October. The harvest ends in the first week of October that year, and the day the last cotton is ginned is a day with a complicated feeling that you've learned not to try to name. Relief that the hardest part is over. Dread of what comes next. Because what comes next is winter, which has its own deprivations, its own particular flavour of not enough. The hands that cut your fingers begin to heal. Slowly, tentatively, the skin at the fingertips softening back toward something less like tree bark. The cough that lives in the chest of the older workers persists. It will persist all winter. But the new daily irritation stops being added to it. The rations don't change. They're calculated for maintaining a working body during a relatively less physically demanding period, which means they're even less than what you need during the field season, and yet they're the same. The arithmetic of the allotment doesn't account for the fact that a body in winter needs calories for warmth as well as work. The clay becomes more important in winter, or at least different important. The mineral hunger doesn't change. Iron deficiency doesn't take a season off. But there's another layer in winter, a deeper cold in the gut that the clay helps with in its way, sitting down there like a small warm stone. You're more careful now. You understand what happened to Martha. You know which hours Cole usually checks the slave quarters, which days he's distracted, which routines have gaps. You understand that this knowledge, this map of the overseer's patterns, is being held in the heads of everyone in the quarters simultaneously, shared without being explicitly taught. You pick it up the way you pick up language, through exposure, through watching what works, through the gradual accumulation of observation. Celia is the one who tells you about the baking. In winter, when the creek banks are cold and the clay comes out of the ground with a chill in it that goes straight to the back of your teeth, some people bake it first. My mother baked it, Celia says, in the coals, not long, just enough to take the cold out. She shows you a small piece of white clay pressed into a rough ball, settled into the edge of the fire, not the centre, not the main heat, but the outer edge where the coals are dying. Left there for maybe 10 minutes, it comes out warm. The texture changes slightly, a little harder on the outside, still smooth within. The mineral smell sharpens, becoming something almost pleasant, like hot stone. You hold it in your palm and feel the warmth of it work through the cold of your hand. Taste it. The heat changes the taste, brings out something deeper, something that the tongue recognizes as more. The mineral quality is stronger. Whatever the clay has to offer, the warmth seems to offer more of it. Or maybe it's just that warmth is its own kind of medicine, and you accept it wherever you find it. Where did your mother learn, you ask? Celia looks at the fire for a moment. From her mother. Her mother came over on a ship. She doesn't say more than that. Some histories are held closely. Some pain is not performed for anyone else. You eat the warm clay and feel it sit in your stomach, small and warm and mineral, and you think about the chain of hands that passed this knowledge. Grandmother to mother to daughter, ocean to ocean, generation to generation, adjustment after adjustment after adjustment. Surviving is a skill. It requires teachers. December. The cold comes to Mississippi with less drama than people from northern places expect. It doesn't bring snow, mostly. It brings grey skies and a wet cold that gets into the bones more efficiently than dry cold, that finds the gaps in the clothing and settles there, that makes the clay ground of the cabin floor feel like ice, even through the strips of cloth wrapped around your feet. The firewood is rationed. Everything is rationed. You burn what you're given, which is not quite enough to keep the cabin above a temperature that could be described as comfortable, but which is enough to keep it above the temperature that kills. This is a precise calculation made by people who understand that letting you freeze to death would decrease the value of the property. The math of survival runs in both directions. In December, a woman in the far cabin has a baby. Her name is Bessie. She's been here longer than you, 10 years at least, and in that time she has had 2 children sold away and 1 who died of fever at age 3. She approaches the birth of this one with a particular quality of stillness that is not peace. You understand the difference now between peace and the thing that looks like peace when there's nothing else available. The women gather. This is one of the things they can do for each other. The birth happens at night, of course. Everything happens at night. Every private human thing. And the women from the nearby cabins come quietly and without ceremony. And the thing gets done. You hold a candle. You do what you're told. You watch. Bessie asks for clay before the birth, during the long hours of waiting. She asks for the baked kind. Celia has some ready. Celia always has some ready, warming at the edge of whatever fire she's near, as a matter of habit, as a matter of what it means to take care of people. Pregnant women crave clay most intensely of anyone. This is documented, this is observed, this is something that midwives in West Africa have known for generations, and that Western medicine in the 1840s categorizes as a symptom of the disease of Cachexia africana as evidence of mental deficiency. What's actually happening? A pregnant body needs calcium and iron in quantities that would be extraordinary even with a good diet. On a diet of cornmeal and salt pork, those needs cannot be met from food alone. The body looks for alternatives. The body, which has access to information that the doctors writing medical papers do not, goes looking, the clay. Bessie eats it throughout the night. Small pieces, warm. It doesn't make the labour easier. Nothing makes labour easier. But it does something. Meets some need that can't be met another way. And in the early morning of a cold December day, a baby is born who has a chance of being healthy, because her mother's body did not entirely run out of what it needed. You hold the baby for a moment after. She's heavier than you expected, squirming and red-faced, her eyes screwed shut against the world she's been inserted into without her consent. You think she will grow up here. You think she will learn the language of this place, the rules and the rhythms and the geography of survival, the calendar of safe hours and dangerous ones, the difference between the overseer's various moods, the location of the good clay. You think, maybe she will also grow up knowing something else, some other geography. You don't know what that means yet. It's not a hope exactly, because hope is dangerous here. Hope is something you have to calibrate carefully the way you calibrate your voice, the way you calibrate every expression that crosses your face when Cole is watching. But something, some version of something. The baby closes her fingers around yours, tight, stronger than a newborn has any right to be. January. January is the month of repair work and planning, the gap between last year's harvest and next year's planting season. It's when the tools are fixed and the fences are mended and the buildings are assessed for winter damage. It's also when they sell people. Not every January, not everyone. But January is when the calculations are made. What does next year's crop need? What surplus of labour exists? What debts need settling? What cash needs generating? And those calculations sometimes produce names. You know this the way you know everything about the rhythm of the year here. From watching, from the small signals that people who've been here longer than you emit when things are moving in a certain direction. A particular silence, a particular way that people keep their children closer than usual. You watch Cole ride to the big house 3 times in the first week of January. You watch him ride back each time without the look of a man who has completed a task. The 4th time he goes, he comes back with papers. 2 days after that, a man named Daniel is taken. Daniel is 30 years old and the best carpenter on the plantation, and 6 months ago you saw him teach a 12-year-old boy to measure and cut wood with a patience and precision that you didn't know anyone here had space for. He has a wife, or the closest thing to a wife that is available, a woman named Clara, a woman he has spent every available evening with for 3 years, in the way that people build what they can with the materials they're given. He is sold to a plantation in Louisiana, which is 2 states away, and might as well be the moon. Clara doesn't make a sound when they take him. You see her face at the moment he goes around the corner of the barn and out of sight, and what you see there is not grief. Grief is too small a word. But the particular expression of a person who has had something taken from them so many times that the face has learned to become a wall. You know that expression. You see it in the mirror of Ruth's face and Celia's face, and in the face of the child who still hasn't told you her name. You know it because you wear it. Your mother. 2 years ago. Same month. January is the month when the calculations happen. And the people are the numbers in the calculation. That night, after Daniel is taken, you go to the creek bank in the dark. It's cold. January cold, the wet kind, the kind that finds your collarbone and settles there. The creek is low, it's been dry, and the exposed banks have frost on them, pale and glittering in the light of a half moon. The white clay seam is dark now, damp from whatever moisture the earth still holds. You press your fingers in. The cold comes into your hands immediately. The clay doesn't come away cleanly the way it does in summer. It's denser, tighter, reluctant. You work at it until a piece comes free, cool, heavy, smooth on the inside where it hasn't been exposed. You don't eat it immediately. You hold it in your hand and let the cold work through your palm and just stand there at the edge of the creek for a moment. The creek makes a sound in the cold quiet. A low sound, almost a murmur. The sound of water moving over stone in a world that doesn't care what month it is or who was sold this week. The trees on the far bank are bare, just dark lines against the slightly lighter sky. An owl is calling somewhere in the Tupelo, a low resonant call that goes out into the dark and comes back as silence. You've been on this land your whole life. You know this creek. You know the particular smell of this water in different seasons. You know the way the light comes through the cypress trees on Sunday afternoons when you're allowed near the water. You know the places where the catfish hole up in summer. You know the sound the water makes after heavy rain versus the sound it makes now, in this cold, dry January in the dark, with your hands going numb. They own this land, but they do not know it. You do. You put the clay in your mouth and eat it slowly and stand at the edge of the creek until you can't feel your feet anymore, and then walk back to the cabin and get under the thin blanket and lie in the dark for a long time before sleep comes. Spring comes to the delta in a way that feels personal. After the dead grey of winter, and even a Mississippi winter is grey enough, grey and wet and low-skied enough to make you forget that there were ever colours. The spring comes in hard and fast and overwhelming. March. The red-winged blackbirds come back to the swampy edges of the fields. Their call that sounds like a rusty hinge and is the most beautiful thing in the world when it's the first one you've heard in 4 months. The tupelos put out leaves so small and new that they look almost translucent. A pale green, so fresh it seems impossible. The air smells of mud and growth and the particular sweetness of something that has been cold for months and is finally warm. You feel it in your body, the easing, the aching in your joints that you've been carrying all winter, the aching that the older women say is iron, is the body depleted and trying to tell you what it lacks, eases slightly. Not because anything has changed in the rations. The rations don't change with the season, not in any meaningful way. But spring makes the foraging better. There are things to find if you know where to look and when. Wild greens, some of them bitter and some of them almost sweet. Lamb's quarters, watercress in the cold streams, the young leaves of pokeweed before they turn toxic, dandelion if you can find it. These things don't last long, and you can't gather them during working hours and you never get enough of them. But even small amounts make a difference. And the clay is different in spring. In spring, after the winter rains have worked through the hillside, the white kaolin comes through cleaner. The stream cuts fresh edges and exposes new surfaces, clay that hasn't been touched by hands or air, cool and white and smooth as it's ever been. Ruth calls spring the good time for clay. She doesn't explain why, but you suspect she knows what you're beginning to understand. That the mineral content differs with depth, that the freshly exposed clay offers more of what the body needs. You go to the creek with Ruth one Sunday in late March, the first Sunday in months that hasn't been claimed for some repair work or extra task. The light is good. That particular clear spring light that shows everything precisely. That makes the colours of the trees almost painful in their clarity. You work down the bank to the white seam. It's broader than you've seen it before. The winter water has cut deep here, carved away the red clay above and exposed a wide, pale face of kaolin, maybe 3 feet across, running down the bank to the waterline. You both work quietly, the sound of birds, the sound of water, the sound of clay coming free in smooth chunks. Ruth hums something while she works, low, under her breath. A sound you've heard before from her and from Celia and from the women at the end of the row when the overseer's far enough away. A sound that doesn't have words anymore, or has words that got worn away somewhere over the ocean, but that still has its original function, the function of filling a space that would otherwise be empty, the function of being present in a body that belongs to someone else, the function of claiming something, this sound too, this music, carried in the body across an ocean. You hum along, following the melody you don't know, learning it in the only way you learn things that matter, by doing it, by adding your voice to it, by making it yours too. Here is what the doctors were writing in their medical journals in the 1840s. Dr. Samuel Cartwright of Louisiana, a man, a physician, a serious figure in the medical establishment of the antebellum South, published papers describing not one, but several diseases that he claimed were specific to black people. Drapetomania, he called one of them, the disease that caused enslaved people to run away, the disease of wanting to be free. He was serious. This was printed in respected journals. This was cited and discussed. Cachexia africana, the clay eatings, was another. He described it as a form of mental deficiency, a habit born of ignorance and animalistic impulse. He recommended punishment as treatment. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Here is a man with a medical degree looking at people who are being systematically starved and responding to mineral deficiency in a way that has been understood in other cultures for thousands of years, and concluding that the problem is with the people and not the starvation. He was not alone. Other doctors wrote similar things. The medical literature of this period is full of attempts to pathologize the responses of enslaved people to their conditions, the depression that gets called rascality, the resistance that gets called mental disease, the adaptive behavior that gets called ignorance. Anything but what it is, anything but the obvious. Because admitting the obvious, that these are human beings responding rationally to inhumane conditions, would require acknowledging that the conditions are inhumane, and that acknowledgement is not available in 1847 in this part of Mississippi, not officially, not in writing, not from Dr. Cartwright and his colleagues. The people who understand what's actually happening don't write papers. Their understanding is kept in the body, in the practice, in the passing of a piece of white clay from one pair of hands to another. Summer comes again. Your second summer at the creek bank. Your second summer knowing where the good clay is. You've been here your whole life, but you know it differently now. Know it more precisely. Know where the clay is and where the catfish are and where the wild greens come up in spring. Know the geography of survival in this specific place. Something else changes in the summer. The child, the girl who came a year ago and never gave her name, tells you her name. She tells you on a hot Tuesday afternoon in June, when you're both drawing water from the well and the work is slow and there's no one immediately watching, and she looks at you out of the side of her eyes the way she does when she's deciding something and says, "My name is Rose." Just that. You say it back. Rose. She nods, goes back to the bucket. You think about what it cost her to say it. A name is not a small thing. A name given to someone is an act of trust. And trust is something that has to be rebuilt here, painstakingly, from very small materials, after the system has done everything in its power to make it impossible. Rose, you say nothing else. You don't make it bigger than it is. You just remember it, and you use it when you speak to her, and you watch, over the following weeks, something in her posture change. The way she takes up slightly more space, the way her eyes stop scanning for exits quite so constantly. Not safe. You would never call her safe here, but less reduced. Ruth sees it too. Ruth sees everything. "She's going to be all right," Ruth says one evening, in a voice so neutral it could mean anything. But you've learned to read Ruth's neutrals, and this one means what it says. It means she sees something in Rose that she recognizes. The thing that survives. The clay becomes, over that year, a kind of ritual. Not formally, not with ceremony, just with the particular weight that any repeated practice takes on when it's shared and necessary and connected to a history deeper than your own life. Sunday mornings, in the hour before the required attendance at the white church, where the white preacher tells you about obeying your masters, which is the only part of Christianity that the plantation owners think is relevant to you, some of the women go to the creek. Not together, not in a group that would draw attention, one at a time or two, with the practiced casualness of people doing something unremarkable. You go, Ruth goes, Celia goes, moving slowly on her swollen joints, making the walk a small triumph every time. Rose goes in the 3rd month after she tells you her name, after Ruth brings her along and shows her the pale seam and the right way to take what it offers. Bessie's baby grows. Her name is May. May takes her first steps in September, in the hard-packed earth outside the cabin, watched by every woman in the quarters with the particular fierce attention that you give to things that have to be protected. She falls down 6 times before she makes it 3 paces without help, and gets up each time with an expression of outrage and determination that you recognize from her mother. She will be strong, this girl. You look at her and think about what kind of world you want her to grow up in, and then stop yourself because that way lies a pain you can't afford. But sometimes you think about it anyway. Autumn again. The cotton opens again. The second harvest is different from the first, not easier. The work is the same, the cuts are the same, the heat is the same, the weight of the sack is the same, but different in the interior, in what you carry into the field with you. You know things now. You know the work so deeply it's moved into the part of the brain that doesn't require conscious attention. Your hands move and your mind is somewhere else. This is both a mercy and a small horror. Mercy because it protects you from the grinding tedium of 12 hours of the same motion. Horror because it means the work has colonized your nervous system so completely that it happens on its own. You know the people, not just their names. You knew names, but their particulars. The way Celia favours her left hand, the way Rose hums the same note Ruth hums, picked up without either of them noticing, the way Bessie looks at May when she thinks nobody's watching, with an expression so naked and so fierce it's almost hard to look at directly. And you know the clay. You know it the way you know the creek and the fields and the weight of the cotton sack. By body, by repetition. By the way it has become part of the grammar of your days. The mineral hunger is still there. It will always be there, as long as the food is what it is and the body is what it is. But you've learned to hear it clearly, to answer it precisely, to give it what it's asking for in the particular language of the earth. This is a form of knowledge, a form of power, the smallest possible form in the circumstances, but real. One afternoon in late October, Cole catches you. Not at the clay, not that. You're walking back from the far field with the other hands when he comes out from behind the barn and stands in the path and looks at you with the expression that means he has decided something. You, he says, meaning you stop. Where were you last Sunday afternoon? Your mind does the rapid calculation that is always happening in the background that you have gotten very fast at. Weighing truth and consequence, what he knows and what he can prove, what the risk of lying is versus the risk of truth. The creek, you say. Fishing? Yes, sir. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he looks at your hands, then back at your face. Anyone see you? No, sir. He is deciding something. You keep your face still. You have become very good at keeping your face still. Finally he nods once and steps aside. You walk past him. Nothing else happens. No muzzle. No punishment. Nothing. You're never sure what that moment was, whether he knew more than he said, whether he was warning you, whether he was simply performing authority for his own satisfaction. With Cole, you can't always tell the difference between those things, but you learn something from it. You learn that the surface of his authority has more cracks in it than it presents, that he too is performing, calculating, deciding what is worth his energy and what is not, that the performance of control requires witnesses and occasions, and sometimes, in a path behind a barn in October, It just doesn't come together. This is useful information. Winter again. You're 17 now, a year older than when Ruth showed you the gully. A year of clay, of seasons, of funerals. One in January, an older man whose heart gave out in the cold, and births. Two, one in spring and one in fall, both girls, both so far surviving, and sales, 3 names, 3 people taken, and the ordinary, extraordinary accumulation of 1 year's worth of living. The cabin is still cold in winter. The rations are still what they are. But something has shifted. Not in the circumstances. The circumstances are identical. In the interior, in what you carry. Celia teaches you something new in February. In the evenings when the candle is out and you're lying in the cold dark waiting for sleep, she tells you stories. Not the stories about Africa. Those she keeps carefully. Those are for certain moments and certain people. These are other stories. Stories about people who ran. People who found their way north. People who made it to places where the math of survival was different. She doesn't say their names. She barely describes them. Just tells you that there are people who went north and lived differently. You ever think about it, you ask, in the calibrated whisper that is the only voice available. Celia is quiet for so long you think she's fallen asleep. Every day, she finally says, since I was your age. Every single day. Another long quiet. But I have my joints now, and Rose has me, and may need someone who knows what she needs to know. Some people run. Some people stay and make sure the running is possible for the next ones. She says this very simply, like it's just information. Is that enough, you ask? It has to be, she says. You lie in the dark and think about this for a long time. The clay, warming at the edge of the fire, smells faintly of the creek. Faintly of that mineral, deep ground smell that is the smell of this place more than any other. The smell that goes below the cotton and the cornmeal and the sweat and reaches the actual earth. You belong to this earth in ways you didn't choose and aren't honoured and don't consent to. But you know it. And knowledge, even stolen, even uncredited, even extracted by force, knowledge lives in the body. They can't take what's in the body. Spring again. It comes the same way it always comes. The red-winged blackbirds, the translucent green, the mud and water smell. But this year in March, something happens that doesn't happen every year. A woman named Sarah runs. You don't know she's going until she's already gone. This is the only safe way. You wake up one cold March morning and Sarah's pallet is empty and it stays empty. Cole rides out and spends 3 days looking. She isn't found. At least not here. Not in March. Not in that field. Maybe somewhere north. Maybe nowhere. You don't know. You will never know. But the empty pallet stays in your mind. The shape of an absence that is a kind of presence. The possibility that the empty space represents. Ruth says nothing about it. Celia says nothing about it. Nobody says anything about it. But that evening at the creek, Ruth hums that song again while her hands work in the pale clay. You hum along. Rose hums along. The 3 of you at the creek bank in early spring. The water running cold and clear. The kaolin smooth and white in your hands. The bird sound everywhere. The same song that crossed an ocean. The same mineral knowledge that crossed an ocean. The same bodies knowing what they need, asking for it, taking what the earth offers. Some things, you can't take some things. And now, let's do what we do at the end. Let's slow down. The fields are empty in late evening. The sky over the delta goes through its colours. Orange, roses, then the particular deep blue of a country night. And the air cools fast the way it does in fall. that rush of cold after the heat of the day, like stepping into a stream. You're back in the cabin, the sounds of the settlement winding down around you, Bessie nursing May near the fire, Rose asleep already, curled in her corner, finally taking up the space she deserves. Celia's breathing, slow and measured, already finding the rhythm of sleep. The clay is wrapped in your head cloth, keeping the warmth of the day in it. You unwrap it. Feel the smooth weight of it in your palm. This thing, this small, extraordinary thing that your grandmother's grandmother knew to look for, and her grandmother before that, and the grandmother before that, back to the people who found it in the red clay hills of a continent that is not this one, but that is still yours. They crossed an ocean to forget and couldn't. Bodies don't forget. And so this piece of white earth in your hand, in this cabin, in this darkness, it connects backward through a chain of hands and knowledge so long you can't see the beginning of it. A chain that survived ships and auctions and iron muzzles and medical journals that called it a disease. It is not a disease. It is wisdom. The smallest, most essential kind of wisdom. The kind that lives in the body and answers the body's needs. The kind that says, I know what you're missing. I know where to find it. Take this. Take what the earth offers. You eat the clay slowly. Feel it dissolve into the chalk mineral smoothness that is its own particular thing in the world, like no other thing. Your stomach quiets. Not full, but quieted. That's enough. That's enough for tonight. Outside the cabin, the Mississippi night is doing what it does. The frogs in the low ground are making their sound, the sound that rises and rises in spring until it's a wall of noise and then drops away and fall into something almost like silence. Not silence. The delta is never silent, but the quiet version of itself. The stars are doing what they do. This far from any city in 1847, the sky at night is something that people in the modern world mostly don't have access to. Hundreds of billions of stars undiluted by artificial light. The Milky Way, an actual band of brightness across the sky. The individual stars sharp as glass. These stars were looked at by Ruth's grandmother on the other side of the ocean. These stars were looked at by every person who ever lay down on this specific piece of earth, or any other piece of earth, and felt tired and fed and small. They haven't changed. You think, the people in that White House don't know what the sky looks like from down here. They look at it from their porches, from their columns, from their cultivated distance. They see the same stars, but not like this, not from the ground, not with earth knowledge in your hands and the sound of breathing bodies around you and the creek running somewhere in the dark with its kaolin seams and its cold water. Not with the understanding that you have been taking what the earth offers and making it enough. Let your eyes close. You've earned this. The day was long. The work was hard. The cuts on your hands will heal and then open again and heal, and then the cotton will come back and it will all begin again. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's just the dark cabin and the sound of sleeping and the cooling air. The hunger is quiet tonight. The mineral ache has retreated to wherever it goes when it's been answered. Your body is a piece of the same earth you ate today. Every mineral in your bones came from somewhere in the ground, from rivers and seabeds and the slow transformations of deep time. You're made of the same stuff as the kaolin seam, the same iron, the same calcium, the same deep ground chemistry that has been moving through rock and water and living things since before anyone had words for any of it. The earth is not theirs. You can't say that out loud. You can barely say it inside yourself, in this dark cabin, in this season. But it's true. The earth is not theirs. They have papers for it, deeds and titles, and the violence that backs up the deeds and titles. But the earth doesn't know that. The creek doesn't know that. The kaolin seam doesn't know that. What the clay knows is body to body, palm to mouth. What the clay knows is, I have what you need. Come find me. I have been here longer than anyone who claims to own me. Take this. Take what the earth offers. That knowledge is Ruth's and Celia's and Rose's and Bessie's and the baby May's and yours. It crossed an ocean. It will cross whatever comes next. But before we sleep, let's go back. Because there's something I didn't tell you yet. Something that belongs in the middle of the story, between the first winter and the second spring, between Daniel being sold and Sarah's empty pallet. Something that happens in February. In February of that year, they bring a doctor. The doctor arrives in a black coat on a grey Tuesday, riding in on a horse that is better fed than anyone in the quarters, and he is here, officially on paper, in the record the overseer keeps, for health inspection. This happens sometimes on the larger plantations. A doctor, hired by the hour, comes to assess the physical condition of the enslaved workers, not because anyone here cares about your health in any independent sense, but because health is asset value. A body that can't work is worth less than a body that can. A sick body is a financial problem. The doctor's name is Whitmore. He's maybe 45 from New Orleans, and he has the particular manner of a man who has decided long ago exactly what category everything belongs in, and is therefore never surprised. He examines the workers in the barn. This is a word, examines, that covers a wide variety of things. He looks at teeth. He looks at skin. He holds up wrists and checks pulse. He asks about ailments in the offhand way of someone taking an inventory. When he gets to you, he looks at your hands first. The cuts. The chronic rawness of harvest work, healed now in February but leaving a roughness, a scarring at the fingertips. He looks at the inside of your lower eyelid, which is one of the ways doctors in this period check for anemia. The colour of the blood vessels there, whether they're pink or pale. Yours are pale. He makes a note. Then he asks Cole, standing to the side, about clay eating. Cole says yes, there is that problem here, they've dealt with it, it continues despite intervention, several workers. The doctor nods. He writes something. He does not look at you when he says this, though you're standing 3 feet away. The disease presents most strongly in women of childbearing age, he says to Cole, and in cases of advanced anemia. You see how pale the conjunctiva is here. He gestures toward you without looking at you. This one is almost certainly eating clay. The pallor suggests iron deficiency, which creates the craving. A pause. You stand very still. The treatment, he continues, is to address the craving through diet where possible, and to suppress the behaviour where diet is not sufficient. He means the iron muzzle. He means punishment. There's new formulation, iron tonic, dissolved in water, that some practitioners recommend. I have some in my kit if you're interested. Cole says he'll take it. The doctor closes his bag. You stand in the barn with the grey February light coming through the gaps in the boards, and you listen to a man describe your body's wisdom as a disease. Listen to him discuss the treatment of your hunger, the way he might discuss a problem with livestock, and you keep your face completely still. This is the other thing they can't take from you. The stillness, the ability to hold what you know, perfectly still, in a face that shows them nothing. You know what the clay is. You know why you eat it. You know the difference between what this man is writing in his notebook and what is actually true. He doesn't know that you know. He can't see it. The knowledge is in the body, and the face is a wall, and the wall holds. He leaves in the afternoon, back to New Orleans, back to his journals and his papers. He will write about the clay-eating habit of enslaved workers sometime in the next year, citing cases from several Mississippi plantations. He will recommend the iron muzzle and the tonic and the management of diet. He will not mention hunger. He will not mention rations. He will not mention the kaolin belt that runs through this exact region of Mississippi, because he doesn't know about it. Because knowing about it would require the kind of looking that he has decided is unnecessary. You will never read what he writes, but you already know it's wrong. The iron tonic. Let's talk about that for a moment. Cole administers it for 3 weeks. A cup of water with dissolved iron compound, ferrous sulfate most likely, which is what these tonics typically contained, distributed at meal times. The taste is metallic and slightly sour. It sits in the stomach uncomfortably. For some people, it helps a little. Iron deficiency anemia responds to iron supplementation regardless of source, and ferrous sulfate is a legitimate treatment. But the amount given is too small, not enough to correct the deficiency that has been building for months or years in bodies that are consistently underfed. A therapeutic dose of iron requires precision and consistency that nobody here is going to apply. The clay works better, not because the clay is a superior medicine in absolute terms, but because the clay is available, because it's free, because it answers the body's call at 3 a.m. when the craving wakes you, and there's no tonic available and the hunger goes bone deep. Because the clay has been doing this job, answering this particular need, since before there were doctors writing in journals about it. After 3 weeks, Cole stops administering the tonic. He doesn't explain why. It costs money and shows no visible results, and he's a man who makes his decisions based on what he can see. The clay remains. The clay remains. There is a man in the quarters named Joseph. You don't know Joseph well. He works in the far fields, the corn and the sorghum, not the cotton, and the two groups don't mix much during working hours. But on Sunday afternoons, in the clearing behind the cabins where people gather in the gap between the end of church obligation and the beginning of the next day's preparation, you see him. Joseph is 40-something and has been on this plantation since before you were born. He knows things about this place that go back further than anyone else's memory. He knows where the first well was dug and where it was moved and why. He knows the names of 3 overseers before Cole. He knows the trees that were planted and the trees that were already here when the clearing was made. Joseph has never eaten clay. He eats other things instead, roots and bark and certain leaves that other people don't touch, things he was taught in the way that Ruth was taught. The same inheritance from the same long chain, but a different branch of it. You ask him once, a Sunday in summer, sitting against the fence at the edge of the clearing, about the difference between his medicine and yours. He looks at you for a moment. Your mother's people are from the inland, he says. My people are from the coast. Different medicines. He says this very simply, like geography explains everything, which in some ways it does. Both work, you ask? He shrugs. I'm still here. This is the highest compliment available in this situation. Still here, still alive, still working, still in possession of a body that can do what is required of it. Still here. You think about what it means to still be here. You think about this on the ridge, looking out over the plantation. You think about it at the creek bank with your hands in the kaolin. You think about it on the hardest mornings of harvest when the alarm bell rings and your body says no, not again, and you get up anyway. Survival in this place is not passive. It is not simply the absence of death. It is an active practice, daily, hourly, applied with skill and intention to the conditions of a world that is designed to make it impossible. The clay is part of that practice. The stillness of the face is part of that practice. The humming is part of that practice. That wordless melody that Ruth carries and you carry now and Rose carries. The song that is not quite a song anymore, but is something the body does when the mind needs something to hold on to. The Sunday at the creek is part of that practice. The stories Celia tells in the dark are part of that practice. The precise calibrated knowledge of where coal is and when, that is part of that practice. Every one of these things was learned, was taught, was passed from hand to hand and voice to voice across time and distance. The practice of surviving this place did not begin with you and will not end with you. You are a point in a long line, receiving what was passed and passing what you've learned. May will learn it someday, whatever version of it is available to her, in whatever world she grows up in. That thought, May growing up, is one you allow yourself more often than hope itself, which is too dangerous. This is not hope exactly. It is a kind of insistence, a refusal to accept that the line ends here. The line does not end here. August, and the heat is a physical weight. The cotton is almost open. 3 more weeks, maybe 4, before the harvest begins in earnest, and the whole plantation has that particular feeling of before, a tension that sits under everything, in the way the overseers move, in the way the work pace has already started to creep upward. In August, on the worst evenings, the quarters are unbearable. No movement in the air. The boards of the cabin, heated all day by Mississippi sun, radiating that heat back into the space through the night. The packed bodies, the smell, which has been the same smell your whole life but feels closer in this heat, more insistent. You take your blanket and sleep outside when you can. Others do too. Celia can't. Her joints won't let her get back up from the ground in the morning without help, and she won't ask for help. But the younger ones lie outside in the small yard, looking up at whatever stars are visible through the humid August haze. On one of these nights, lying in the dirt yard with the heat of the day still rising from the ground beneath you, you hear something. A sound from further along the quarters. Low. Multiple voices. You lie still and listen. It's singing. Not the calibrated whisper kind. Something just slightly louder than that, just enough to carry on the still air. 4 or 5 voices in a sound you've heard fragments of, pieces of, but never quite like this. A call and response pattern, one voice leading and the rest answering, that has the particular structure of something very old. Ruth's voice is in there. You recognize it. You get up quietly and follow the sound. Behind the last cabin, in the narrow space between the fence and the tree line, maybe 8 or 10 people are gathered. Not for anything you could put a name to. Not a meeting with a purpose. Not a ceremony. Just people in the late night heat, in the dark, making sound together. Ruth is leading. She has a voice that is not particularly beautiful in the conventional sense. It is roughened by age and use, but which has an authority to it, a depth that makes other voices want to follow it. The song doesn't have words you recognize, or it has words in a language that has been mostly lost, worn away by decades of prohibition, reduced to sounds that the body still knows the shape of even if the mind has lost the meaning. The sounds are right. The body knows they are right. The way the body knows the clay is right without being able to explain it. You add your voice. You don't know the words. You know the shape of the sound. You follow Ruth the way you follow her to the clay bank, with your body, with what the body holds, with trust in the chain of knowledge that runs back through hands you will never see. Nobody stops you from joining. Nobody asks if you know the words. You don't know the words. You know what matters about them. The sound goes up into the August night, into the haze where the stars are hidden, into the air over the cotton fields that will open in 3 weeks and take your hands again. The sound rises. Here is what I want you to understand about the white clay. Not the chemistry, not the iron content or the kaolin structure or the geological formation of the Mississippi Delta. I want you to understand what it meant. In a world that was designed, deliberately, systematically, with legal and social infrastructure, to reduce these people to bodies, to functions, to units of labour and units of property, in a world that removed names and languages and families and replaced them with numbers and designations and rations. In that world, they found something the earth offered freely, something that required no permission, no allotment, no distribution from the overseer, something that existed in the ground of this place and could be taken with the hands that were already there, and they shared the knowledge of how to take it. They taught each other, they passed it down, they maintained it, across the ocean, and across generations and across every attempt to call it a disease and take it away. They ate the earth, and the earth gave what it had. That's not a small thing. That's not just mineral supplementation. That's a refusal to accept that this body and its needs do not matter, that this hunger is not worth answering, that this craving is not wisdom, but sickness. Every time Ruth went to the creek and pressed her fingers into the pale seam and brought out what her grandmother's grandmother showed her to bring out, that was a refusal. Every time Celia baked the clay at the edge of the fire for a labouring woman, that was a refusal. Every time someone wore the iron muzzle and counted the days until it came off and then went back to the clay, that was a refusal, an insistence. We know what we need. We know where to find it. We know what this body is worth, even if you have priced it differently. The clay was eaten in the Deep South by enslaved people from the early colonial period through emancipation. It was eaten by poor white Southerners during the lean years. It is eaten today. You can find kaolin clay sold in markets in the South, small chunks of pale earth wrapped in plastic bags, sold to people who know what it does, who learned it from their mothers, who learned it from theirs. The knowledge survived. It survived because it lives in the body. And the body of all those women, all those generations, the body remembered. Now let's sleep. For real this time. The story is done and the night is long, and you've been carrying this long enough. Let the fields go. Let the heat go. Let Cole's name go. Let Whitmore's name go. Let all the names of men who held papers and thought papers were the same as truth. Let all of that go. What stays is what was kept. Ruth's hands in the clay, Celia's voice in the dark, Rose sleeping with her full name, May's fingers closing on yours strong as anything, the song without words that the body still knows, the pale seam in the creek bank cool in your palm, what the earth offers, what no paper, no deed, no doctor's journal can get to. Let that be the last thing. Let that be what you carry into sleep. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are here. That last one is not a small thing. That last one is the whole thing. That last one is the result of knowledge and practice and community, and a chain of hands going back further than any history that was written down. You are here because they stayed here, because they knew what to do with the earth, because they made something out of almost nothing and kept making it and kept passing it down. You are here because of what the body holds. Let it hold you now. Let sleep come. Let the sounds of the delta fold into each other, the frogs and the creek and the owl and the distant something moving in the trees. Let them fold into one sound, the sound of a world that has been here longer than any claim on it. Let your hands rest. Let your breathing slow. Let the hunger sleep. Tomorrow the clay will be where it always is. Tonight you don't need to find anything. Tonight you are already found. Centuries will pass. The plantation will burn, or be sold, or be subdivided, or be made into something else. The cotton fields will be converted to soybeans, to highways, to suburbs. The creek will be rerouted or dammed, or will simply persist, as creeks tend to do, running its own private geography beneath whatever the surface does. The white clay seam will still be there, under whatever is built on top, under however many layers of other time, still white, still smooth, still cool where the water has touched it, and people will still know about it. They will find it in the way that knowledge finds you when you have the right inheritance, in the way that Ruth found it, in the way her grandmother found it, in the way that bodies find what they need when the body's knowledge is honoured. In southern markets in the 21st century, you can still buy kaolin clay to eat, in small packets sold quietly, bought by people who know what it does, mostly women, mostly pregnant women, mostly people who know the tradition even if they don't know the full history behind it. They know it from their mothers knew it from their mothers, all the way back to the creek bank and the cold pale seam and the hands in the earth and the knowledge that was carried in the body across an ocean and preserved through everything that was done to destroy it. Some things don't stop. The hunger changes shape but doesn't stop. The earth offers what it offers and doesn't stop. The knowledge passes and doesn't stop. And the body remembers, all the way back, all the way forward, all the way to here, to this moment, to you, warm and still, with the night around you and the whole dark world outside holding its breath for just a moment before it starts again. Let it start again. But not yet. Right now there's just the quiet, the warm quiet, the earned quiet, the quiet of a body that has been given what it needs. Not everything it needs, not close, but enough, just enough to be here, to be present, to breathe. Let that be enough for tonight. It is enough. Breathe, and again, and sleep. Good night.